Welcome to our event today on energy management, spending, saving and carbon reduction. I'm Emma Keenan. I'm the Deputy Director at the LUPC and I'll be representing UK UPC today. I think this is the first webinar I've been involved in where there has been a genuine interest in the content, both from a personal and business perspective. We are all being affected by the rising costs of energy, and whilst it does present challenges for our budgets particularly, it also presents opportunities for us to force change and which may benefit us all in the longer term. Today is very much about the here and now. Where did we get to where we are today? What are the effects on our estate now? And what opportunities regarding sustainability initiatives can we kind of take advantage of at this point in time? So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our expert speakers who will each share with you their knowledge over 10 to 15 minutes each. Our first speaker is Steve Creighton. He's the Head of Member Services at TEC, the Energy Consortium, and he will cover broadly the energy market. So over to you, Steve.
So just to start with, what I want to take you through is effectively what's been happening in the markets and what may happen going forward. So I thought I would start with the current market graph. It's fairly simple lines. The yellow and green are gas and power for the next season, for winter 22. And then the red and blue are for next year, summer 23. So that's the 1st of April start. And as you can see, there's quite a gap between the two. So in the yellow and green situation, the left-hand side of the graph, just before the big spike, that's when Russia went into the Ukraine. As you can see, it's got quite high pricing and it's broadly sort of flattened out. But that's, you can see the key on the right-hand side, that's at the 250 mark. And what that 250 is, for power, that's £250 a megawatt, which equates to 25 pence a kilowatt hour. And for gas, that's 250 pence per therm. And that equates to broadly 8 pence a kilowatt hour, just to give you some context there. And as we're looking at the red and blue, so what's happening in forward markets beyond winter 22, that range is broadly around the 150 mark, so 15 pence a kilowatt hour for power and 5 pence a kilowatt hour for gas. So what I wanted to go through also is it's not really about what's happening now, but it's what's happened over the last year and what's got us to this sort of pricing position. So if we start with carbon, carbon had quite an upward trajectory during 2021, and it's broadly with financial houses playing that market and driving the price up. And there's anecdotal evidence of some Swiss banks trying to drive the price of European carbon up to €100 per tonne. So there's some financial some financials at play there in the carbon market. What that lends itself to then is carbon becomes very expensive in terms of fossil fuels for generation of electricity. So when we need wind and solar, and we need the sun to shine, we've got a real problem in 2021 where the wind was extremely low. I think it's some of the lowest wind we've seen since 1961. So we've got quite a drop off of renewable generation, and we've had to have more of a reliance on fossil fuel generation, and therefore carbon pricing does have a further impact on that. And we've also looked at, when we're looking at global demand, we've seen massive increases, early increases or exit from COVID in China. And effectively what they did was ramp up a lot of production. And again, that took in a lot of fossil fuels and gas, and particularly liquefied natural gas into the Asian markets. And effectively that diverts it away from Europe and other markets. In terms of storage, this is probably one of the key ones that we've seen is European storage. Effectively what we're required to do both in the UK and Europe is fill up storage over the summer months so that as we get to winter, we've got full storage and we're able to draw on that should other supplies or sort of dwindle or weather gets very cold. But I'll touch on storage a little bit later. When we look at supply, basically what's happening there in terms of the UK continental shelf and Norwegian continental shelf, which is where the UK gets a lot of its gas from. A lot of maintenance happened there. So effectively, 2020 COVID-related maintenance due to COVID didn't take place, and a large number of maintenance took place during 2021. So effectively, that reduces the ability to move supply into the UK in a large number of cases, but also into Europe. And we're probably all aware that large amounts of investment have come off the table in terms of gas and oil investment has dwindled, and also there's been probably delays in development of nuclear as well. And it was only last week that we saw that they're looking to increase nuclear development. Weather is another aspect that we look at, and we've actually had a mild winter, so things could have been a lot worse. They're bad enough anyway, but they could have been a lot worse. So just to give an idea of what's happened in the UK, we've had our system balanced or oversupplied on a daily basis. That means we've had more than enough gas to meet our needs, and probably only a handful of days during winter have we been undersupplied, i.e. we've had to draw from other sources. And then we have the geopolitical situation, and if you're looking at Russia as a case in point, that was already priced into the markets to a degree, but I don't think anyone really believed what was going to happen, or what has happened was going to happen up to about 4 weeks ago. To give you an idea of what European supply looks like, this is just a map of the pipework going through the Ukraine, which is a key area, and then you've got YAML going through Belarus. So these are mainland pipelines, and as you can see, they're moving over to Central and Eastern Europe, where there isn't a lot of gas. So basically, there was a heavy reliance on Russian gas into Europe, and particularly onto the central and eastern belts. As the one thing that we've seen, we've got Nord Stream pipeline, which is the one going through the sea. You've heard of Nord Stream 1 already existed. Nord Stream 2 was basically the one that has taken direct gas from Russia through to Germany. And there's an argument that that Russia wanted to ship all of their gas via that route, and then lessen it through the Ukraine and maybe through Belarus as well. But as we know, that's a friendly state of Russia, so that may have still got gas running through that. And basically what has been happening, Gazprom owns some considerable storage assets in Germany, and basically they weren't filling it, so we've had gas storage at 8-year lows in Europe. So in terms of UK security of supply and where we get our gas from, as you can see on the left-hand side, UK is the green and Norway is the blue. So over 80% of our gas comes into the UK from the UK and the Norwegian continental shelves. And then when you're looking on the left-hand side, effectively that's just a map of the main networks and entry points and exit points into the UK. And then when we look at just the red triangle there, that is Qatar, so that's LNG, and broadly that's coming into Milford Haven on the left-hand side of the UK. And we've got other is probably the next highest, and that is the interconnector between Holland, Belgium, and the UK, and that can flow both ways, so we can get gas in, gas out. And then we're starting to see more LNG come through from the USA, where they converted a lot of their import facilities in the Gulf of Mexico to export facilities to take advantage of the shale gas and oil that they were able to produce there. And then we've got an element of gas works its way across to the UK that does actually come from Russia. And that's been in the form of LNG, or broadly it's a Centrica contract that's taken Russian gas via a variety of routes. So we get very little gas, and as you can see from the previous map, transiting in is a bit of a problem. So I just wanted to look at European storage just to highlight the fact that where storage has been so low. So as you can see, effectively, there's a number of pie charts across this. What we're looking at is the red is the empty capacity effectively in European storage. Now, for both Germany and Italy, they don't have any of their own gas, so they are reliant, very, very reliant on gas coming from elsewhere. And with Germany, it needs to come at broadly 55% of their gas comes from Russia, and so effectively they need that gas because they've got no import terminals for LNG, or certainly for large LNG shipments. Also, during this period, it's likely, during the winter, one of the things that's been happening, the connector from the UK back into Holland and into Belgium, we've been exporting pretty much all through the winter. So even as LNG hits the ground in the UK, it's pretty much flowing straight out of the UK and into Holland. And that's almost going to be almost certainly going to be happening all the way through the summer. Germany has recently nationalised Gazprom's storage assets, and one of those is one of the biggest fields in Europe. So what basically the European Union is saying is, where infrastructure is of critical importance, you can put sanctions in place, or you can nationalise those assets, or Russian assets. Whilst that hasn't necessarily been approved yet, they're effectively saying, don't wait to do it, or don't wait for approval, just do it. So whilst storage assets are going to get, they will almost certainly be sanctioned and nationalised where they're Russian owned. What that means is there's going to be a need to fill up European storage quite heavily during summer, and basically I think certainly in the case of Germany, they're stipulating that they need to be at 65% full by the 1st of August, 80% by the 1st of October, and 90% by the 1st of December. And likewise across the countries, number of the countries in Europe. So there is going to be a great need for gas certainly during summer, to meet those storage levels, storage requirements. So we'll just take you back to crystal ball and what's next. I'll take you back to the next slide. So it's very possible that the one thing I should say is, the UK, in terms of security supply, we don't have an issue. We have plentiful gas coming from sources that are contracted, so that 80%, and then the LNG, which is the rest, we are getting a good number of flows. I think we've seen 13 flows that have either arrived in April or are due to arrive in April. We've got a number of contracted flows from Qatar, but we're seeing a lot of US gas, and a number of US gas flows are going into Belgium and into Holland as well. So we don't have a security of supply issue, but we do have a cost issue. And when you're looking at the Far East and Asia on LNG, when the Asian market's quite expensive, then if we want it, we've got to pay those same rates. So we are at the mercy of price, but we're not at the mercy of security. But what I do think is going to happen is there's going to be a considerable amount of gas coming into the UK, flowing straight out of the UK to support European storage. So when we're looking at the yellow and green, that gas is being stored. Gas is being stored at those prices, so it needs to come out at those prices. And if we need it at all, then it's going to come out of those prices as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So whilst that line, the red and blue, is broadly flat at the bottom, it's still at quite a high price. So we're not seeing any silver linings to say the price is going to drop off massively. But the bit we probably do need to avoid is for those red and blue lines to start jumping or looking like the green and yellow lines as we go forward. So just in summary, no security of supply issues, but there is a price issue. So it's in terms of one of the things that members and people can do on their estates. So what the one key thing that people really need to do, and at home for that matter, it's why I've got a jumper on and no heating on. It is warm today, but it's one of the reasons. Don't use gas. We've got to find ways of not using gas. And then probably just one other mitigation that's going to come on, one of the speakers is going to come on to later, is around long-term supply agreements, so power purchase agreements. So you're probably able to mitigate elements of your price risk and energy risk by taking on longer-term hedges. So it's a detailed subject and as short as possible, and I'll hand back to Emma.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I know from the conversations we've had recently, that was very much a whistle-stop tour, and lots of people, I'm sure, will have lots of questions on that. We will share the contact details for our panelists at the end of this and with the recording. So if you have any further questions, you can get in touch. Please do use the Q&A facility, which is at the bottom there, for any questions that you have throughout the webinar. But for now, we're going to move on to talk with Umesh Desai, who is the Director of Estates and Facilities at Montfort University. So thanks very much, Umesh. Over to you.
Thank you, Emma. Good afternoon, everyone. As Emma said, my name's Umesh Desai. I'm currently the Director of Estates and Facilities at Montfort University, and as of last week, Chair of the Association of University Director of Estates. I'll be sort of speaking with two hats today: the issues and challenges at my current university and how this affects the wider university sector as well. So I'm going to spend about 5-10 minutes going through some of the high-level issues that we've faced and some of the things that we're doing about it, which might help and assist colleagues who are listening to this. For the vast majority of universities, the energy management would fall under the remit of the Estates Director. This includes procurement, monitoring usage, energy efficiency, and most importantly, the budgetary responsibility. Without actually having control over the energy consumption, this is often something that's a major battle for most Estates Directors. We hold the budgets, but we don't actually manage who uses how much. After staff costs, the energy budgets are the single highest cost to a university, and depending on the size and age and condition of your estate, it could be in the multi-million pounds. One thing that's want to be clear, that there is no one size that fits all, and today's session is aimed at providing a solution. It's not aimed at providing a solution, as there is no magic wand. So as Steve mentioned earlier, just challenges for the all HE providers over the last 2 years has been to balance the need to provide a COVID-safe campus while maintaining thermal comfort, and how we have added challenge to the high and volatile energy costs. So ventilation rates and requirements for full fresh air to reduce airborne COVID transmission led to an increase in usage, certainly at DMU for gas, by circa 25% in 2021 compared to a typical year. And this pushed up energy costs at a time when their costs associated with COVID were already impacting on budgets. Pre-COVID, we all had strategies and plans to reduce our carbon footprint, and many had probably signed up to the Climate Emergency Charter and committed to reduce or remove carbon by 2030. During the early stages of lockdown, universities would have a drop in energy usage and costs, but this was short-lived, with government guidance dictating that in order to ensure adequate minimum ventilation, buildings had to be open and fresh air and to allow any face-to-face teaching. And most universities, I think, came back to some form of full occupancy from September 2021. For DMU, we had to take a view that our ventilation running was 24/7 to ensure we complied with the HSE guidelines and satisfied certainly our union colleagues who, on behalf of staff, wanted assurances that we had a COVID-safe campus. There's lots of steep learning curves here. Nobody really knew what the right solution was. What do we do? Do we just have the minimum amount of ventilation? Do we run it 24/7? How do we actually convince our stakeholders, union reps and staff to say it's fine, it's safe? We took a view to have it running 24/7. It's created major challenges for us of having not only to have higher heating bills, but also to have you having longer and for longer periods to combat the cold environments. But we were literally throwing money out the window. One of the good things about the Audit Association was that actually there was a safe space for former peers to actually have conversations about the challenges we were facing. What are we doing about this? How are we tackling the challenges, the situations? What is the right solution? I think we quickly established that there wasn't one solution that actually worked for all, and we were all learning. Some were actually doing what we were doing, having ventilation on 24/7. Others were actually taking much more of a pragmatic approach and saying, right, let's have monitors, let's look at the BMS system, let's put in more ventilation in there. In some cases, let's close buildings down. One of the things that's important for us that DMU has been slower in actually moving professional services staff and freeing up space. A lot of universities took the ball and closed buildings very early on. We only completed some of our moves about 2 months ago. So most part of our campus was fully working and therefore needed to be lit and heated throughout the whole period. I don't think we're ever going to satisfy everyone at all times. We actually currently monitor energy constantly for normal usage. This is essential to identify any potential wastage, such as boilers coming on overnight, or when buildings are, or weekends, or when buildings are not in use. The reverse side of this, a good example is as we get more and more smart with our technology on our campus, there are challenges. I was talking to some of the panel members earlier. This morning, we had a major outage on our systems and our network, and it shut off all boilers and all systems across our campus. That created a lot of problems as well for us. We had to go around making sure everything is working. So the smarter the campus you have, the more intelligent the campus you have, the more susceptible you are to some of these nuances. Key thing here really is communication. So, you know, one of the things that we're having to try to get across to staff and students, and I think many universities are doing the same, is that we need to treat where you work as your house, as your home. Would you be leaving the heating on? Would you be having the lights on? Would you have all the windows on because of COVID? Or would you be looking at wearing appropriate clothing? You do that at home. So why do you expect universities to actually provide the heating on for higher temperatures for longer because it's not yours? A message that we recently I gave out to all our staff and students, which is quite a tough message really, was to make sure that staff and students came to the campus dressed for winter or appropriate clothing. That's not quite easy to do because I think a lot of people will take that the wrong way. They expect the working environment to be adequate and right and compliant, but actually we have to be careful here as well. So what are we doing now? So in order to control our energy costs and reduce waste and maximize efficiency, is still our priority. For the last 2 years, we've invested massive investments in all our lighting and control systems and replaced, I would say, 95% of our buildings with LED lighting. And I think that's a massive impact on terms of our energy use for a duration. But that's not going to actually be a long-term solution for us. That's just one small segment of it. We're working on improving our BMS systems and controls to make sure that we're actually working right, replacing outdated Schneider systems with new modern trend systems, and training all our operatives so they understand how these work. It's not all about people using it, it's all about people who are managing it as well, making sure they've got an awareness of what it is they're doing. The university, like many other universities, would have actually have an energy policy, and making sure that actually we are adhering to our energy policies. They would have been approved by the respective executive boards, leadership teams, etc. And often it's put on a shelf and people don't look at it. They often want a compliant and a confident and a comfortable environment in the workplace. But actually go back to those energy policies, remind yourselves, what is it that we signed up to? Are we actually adhering to it? Are we actually telling staff and students this is what it is? Are we reducing electric heating power, portable heaters, etc., which is still being a common issue for us at DMU? One of the things that I think Steve spoke about earlier was about this collaboration. So we actually are working with TSE, and we've actually procured our energy through TSE as well. And actually that actually helps to look at the long-term solutions. And I think it's important that with the current challenges we have with energy, as well as the forthcoming ones, when we understand the full impact of the Ukraine crisis, will be a real challenge for us. Trading energy is quite important. And on the wholesale market, complex undertakings requiring a great deal of expertise and access to do with latest intelligence. Most universities will not have that kind of expertise in-house and will need to use a third-party organizations like TSE. We're working with them at the moment, and I think Steve mentioned earlier, to look at power purchase agreements that will provide us with the ability to procure a proportion of our energy for the next 5, 10, 15 years through generation, to direct from generators. And this will give us some price certainty in the medium term and form an active part of our energy cost risk strategy. If you are not already doing so, I would urge you to actually make sure you all have a working group with the states, finance and procurement colleagues to regularly review and consider energy costs, forecasting, longer term strategies, and the lowering cost of cost purchase. One of the things I think there is a view from finance colleagues that we actually understand and actually predict energy costs to right down to the £10. It's impossible to do that, particularly over the last 12 months and certainly for the next 24 months, I would say. However, every university will be in a different situation. Some will be in a financial position where not that money isn't an issue, but they can actually carry on doing the things they're doing without actually worrying about it. While most universities will be focusing on how do you reduce those costs, not just now, but in the longer term. At last week's Award Annual Conference, we heard a talk from the University of Birmingham on how they are already on a journey to invest over £300 million to get to carbon zero, and also looking at ways of doing smart technologies, heat decarbonisation, on-site renewals, etc. A very ambitious plan, and absolutely most of the audience were in awe at the final scale and the investment that was put in. But that is actually a unique thing. I think most universities haven't got that level of investment that they can put at it. So always making sure that anything that you do is in context with actually what affordability you can have. Is your strategy realistic? Is it achievable? The ever-changing challenges such it's hard to focus on the future, and many of us are now firefighting with budgetary and sustainability challenges right now. But it's important that you do actually have an eye on the future as well. And the one key area that I would suggest, if you haven't already embarked on it, is to actually adopt a heat decarbonisation plan for your campus, setting out the approach that you'll take and to decarbonise the heat in the future. We've already started that journey and had our plan approved by our executive board 2 weeks ago. It's looking at the next 5 to 10 years, but we have to start looking at that now. Otherwise, we could be still on the back foot. It'll also give many universities the opportunity to apply for funding that's out there from government. Whether we're successful with that or not is another matter, but they will all ask for a HDP plan in existence that's been approved by your executive board. We've actually already started on that journey. We're already looking at air source heat pumps at the moment, and we'll be working on that over the next 6 months. But the important thing as well is to make sure you get your staff and student behaviours changing, raising awareness through carbon literacy programs and also green impact initiatives. But the main thing again is making the connection between the work life and the home life and asking people to say, would you do this at home? And I think that's so quite powerful as well. Universities all now have a sustainability and the net carbon zero target, and it's actually one of the big strap lines on their strategies. And it's something that they're actually promoting heavily across the sector. And actually students who are coming through are going to be interested in seeing that. It's going to be important. They're not going to be saying, oh, well done. It's going to be expected of universities to actually have something in place that's realistic and they actually mean it. But the question I want to pose to members here, and certainly for others, is the benefits of carbon reduction, and this is quite a bit controversial, versus the cost of implementation. What are the benefits? Is it worth the money that you have to spend to actually get those benefits? And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people here will argue one or the other. The increased cost of electricity as a result of implementing some of these changes are going to be quite sizable. So the question is, environment or financial sustainability? Sometimes not all universities will be able to have both. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Umesh. That was very interesting and a nice controversial ending there from you. I think, a couple of years ago when COVID hit and we all suddenly started to have to try and learn how to do things differently, marks have changed, didn't it, in how we were doing things. And I think some of the points that Umesh raised there about making sure that we have cross-functional teams, that we recognise that we have procurement, we have finance, we have sustainability professionals and estates professionals on those working parties to ensure that we cover off all of the thought processes and all of the opportunities and risks. So moving on to our final speaker, last but definitely not least, I'm really pleased to introduce Sally Pidgeon, who is the Deputy Head of Sustainability at the University of Cambridge. And Sally's going to talk through, using Cambridge as a case study, some of the sustainability opportunities and projects that they've undertaken. So Sally, over to you.
Thank you, Emma, and good afternoon, everybody. As Emma said, I'm going to talk through what the University of Cambridge is doing to reduce its carbon emissions. And I'm presenting that really as a case study of what universities can do to reduce both their energy use and associated emissions. Just to say, you may have been expecting Joanna Chamberlain, Head of Sustainability, today to do this presentation, but unfortunately Joanna is unwell and unable to make it. So I am here in her place. So first of all, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the university commitments in this area. Our headline commitment is to make a positive impact through outstanding environmental sustainability performance. And that commitment is affirmed within the university's environmental sustainability vision, policy and strategy document that was adopted in 2015. That's the document you can see on the left-hand side of this slide. More recently, the university has adopted a carbon reduction strategy, which, as the name suggests, sets out our aspirations and targets relating specifically to carbon reduction. The university has also adopted a transport strategy, which has a focus on sustainable travel at work. And most recently, the university has adopted a biodiversity action plan, which provides a 10-year vision and direction for conserving and promoting biodiversity on the university's estate. Finally, shown in the right-hand corner of this slide, in 2019, Cambridge became the first university to announce a science-based target for its energy-related emissions. And as you can see, this next slide provides that science-based target, or SBT, in more detail. In summary, the target commits us to reducing our energy-related emissions by 75% against 2015-16 levels by 2030, and then to go on to become absolute zero by 2048 at the latest. And just to highlight that these commitments require us to achieve an absolute contraction of our emissions and energy use, i.e. there is no use for offsetting in meeting our science-based targets. So I've briefly set out our sustainability commitments, just to provide you some context. And before I move on to talking about our approach to carbon reduction, I just want to refer to our award-winning annual environmental sustainability reports, which we publish every year to report on progress against our commitments and highlight where we need to do more. We've been using these for about 6 years now, and our main focus within these reports is on being very open and transparent about what's going well and what's not going so well. We see this as a really important part of our overall approach to carbon reduction. And in the interests of transparency, for the past 2 years, we have gained independent assurance of the data, the sustainability data that's presented in these reports. So for the rest of my talk, I'm going to be focused on the work we're doing to deliver against our science-based target in particular. The slide you've got in front of you now simply provides a breakdown of our energy-related carbon emissions. So it gives you a feel for the size of the prize, if you like. As you can see, total location-based emissions for us in 2020-21 were around 55,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent, and they were dominated by emissions from our electricity use, but emissions from gas use is not that far behind now. Once upon a time, gas emissions were significantly lower than electricity emissions, but they're now, a really sizable portion of our overall emissions. So the first thing I'd like to talk to you about in terms of our approach to carbon reduction is an area of work we've actually been taking forward for over 10 years now. And it's namely a programme of energy and carbon reduction measures funded through our Carbon Reduction Fund. And here I'm talking about the typical or standard energy efficiency improvements you'd expect to implement within your building, such as LED lighting replacements, replacing plant and equipment with more energy efficient models, BMS improvements, etc. These are the sort of projects that our Carbon Reduction Fund has supported over the years. It's also funded a lot of replacement of energy intensive research equipment with more energy alternative models. And that's very important for Cambridge, being a research intensive university. As the slide shows, at the end of 2020-21, we'd invested around 12.2 million in energy efficiency measures through the fund. And as a result of that investment, over the lifetime of those projects, our energy expenditure is expected to be at least 26.6 million lower than it would have been if we had not made those investments. And in fact, that estimate is based on an older unit energy cost. That figure was put together earlier on this year. So taking into account our current and near future costs, our avoided energy costs will actually be quite a bit higher than that. So it just goes to show that investment in the sort of bread and butter projects really does have a cumulative positive impact. So whilst our carbon reduction fund has delivered significant benefits, it's not delivering the scale and breadth of carbon reduction that the university needs to achieve in order to deliver against its SBT. So over the last couple of years, we've really been ramping up the scale of our carbon reduction programme to make sure we're delivering what's needed to achieve that absolute zero commitment. So on this slide, I'm just going to talk through some of our key commitments. Firstly, our power purchase agreement, or PPA, as Steve referred to earlier. In 2019, Cambridge joined 19 other UK universities to enter into a landmark PPA, under which we now source around 20% of our electricity directly from UK-based wind farms. The PPA meets the 8 quality criteria of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, so that means we can report the electricity through the PPA as zero carbon. And as a result, in 2020-21, our market-based carbon emissions were around 30,000 tonnes of carbon, as compared to the 55,000 tonnes of carbon location-based figure I showed on an earlier slide. The PPA has also, through the work that Tech did on behalf of us and the other 19 universities, the PPA also secured a lower unit cost for the university, so it's delivered cost savings as well as carbon savings for the university. So it's been a real win-win for the university. The current PPA is a 10-year agreement, and we're now working with Tech to explore opportunities to enter into further PPAs. Our overall strategy with regards to PPAs is to secure further long-term agreements and to gradually increase the proportion of our purchased electricity that is sourced via PPAs up to a maximum of around 85% of our total purchase to supply. And the reason we don't want to go to 100% is because obviously, as well as procuring zero carbon electricity, we need to be working very hard to reduce our energy use in the first place. So we expect our overall electricity use to be coming down in future. So that brings me on to increasing on-site renewable energy generation. This is another strand of our carbon reduction programme we've been working on over the last few years. We're currently awaiting a planning decision on a proposal to develop the university's first ever solar farm. If approved, the farm will meet around 90% of the university's electricity demands based on our consumption levels in 2019. And another exciting project that we've recently delivered to completion is an anaerobic digestion plant on the university's farm. This became operational in August last year. And very simply, the digester takes animal waste from the farm. It uses that to generate methane gas, and then that methane gas is in turn used to generate electricity, which powers the farm. So that's been a really successful project, which we're monitoring closely. Another really important strand of our carbon reduction programme is removing gas from our estate. And again, this was referenced by the earlier speakers. Over the past couple of years, we've been developing a programme to degasify our estate by replacing boilers with air source and ground source heat pumps. The programme also has a really big focus on improving the thermal efficiency of our buildings in order to reduce our demand for heat in the first place. That is a really core part of the programme. It's not simply about swapping out gas plants with heat pumps. As I'm sure you will appreciate, this is a massive undertaking that's going to take us many years to deliver, and that we expect to come with a very significant price tag. We're starting the process by prioritising certain sites and buildings for degasification and using those to learn as we go, so that we can continue to develop our degasification programme. We know we don't have all the answers yet, we just need to make a start and to some extent learn as we go. But we're also very keen to share our learning with others as well, so that we can help others on a similar path. And at the moment, we've got several building level projects underway and are preparing to take forward feasibility studies for some of our key sites. I just wanted to mention work we've done to build carbon into our capital projects process. The university has a significant and ongoing capital programme, including both new build and major development of some of our existing buildings. And obviously it's vital we take steps to reduce the carbon impact of those new builds, but also maximise opportunities that major refurbishments present for reducing energy use. So to that end, we've created a carbon impact template that allows both the operational and embodied carbon impacts of a capital project to be considered from the outset, and for options for reducing both forms of carbon impact to be considered at a very early stage. So we've been using that template for about a year now, and we're finding it's proving highly effective at drawing the attention of decision makers to the carbon impact of our capital projects and at putting those low carbon options on the table. And it's also helped to illustrate the life cycle cost advantages of building carbon reduction into the design of a project from the outset. Finally, I just wanted to say something about cultural and behavioural change. Again, something that a previous speaker has mentioned. As well as technological solutions, we do continue to focus on initiatives that drive behaviour change. And we run a whole suite of programmes aimed at staff and student engagement. The most relevant to today's presentation is the proposed electricity devolution programme, which aims to make our departments directly responsible and accountable for their electricity use. We've been piloting this for a number of years now, although unfortunately it's been delayed by the successive lockdowns we've had. But we're now reviewing how to take that programme forward to implementation. And it's also worth noting our Sustainable Labs programme, which focuses on engaging lab users and managers specifically in initiatives to reduce their energy use, which, as I said earlier, is important for us as we're a very research intensive university. Finally, I just wanted to say something about another opportunity for reducing carbon reduction that we've been looking at for a while now, but that's been given increased focus and impetus following COVID. And that is making more efficient use of our existing space. Cambridge has one of the largest and most inefficiently used estates in the sector. So reimagining how we use our space has huge potential for both energy and carbon reduction. So I'd like to show you a couple of slides which illustrate this at a very high level. The first slide illustrates the level of carbon reduction we might be able to achieve through an ambitious carbon reduction programme. So that's doing everything that I've just talked about and more. And that shows through the grey line the level of carbon reduction we may be able to achieve between now and 2050 and compares that to our science-based target. This slide, for comparison, shows the level of carbon reduction we could achieve by reducing the size of our estate by 1% every year over the next 30 years or so. And this is without us doing or investing in any carbon reduction measures, i.e. everything else stays as business as usual. All we focus on is reducing the size of our estate. Now, whilst that is in itself a massive undertaking and not cost-free, you will see that it could take us a significant way towards achieving our science-based target without us doing anything else in terms of carbon reduction. So that's it from me. I hope that gives you a snapshot overview of what we're doing at Cambridge. And of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sally. So it's my pleasure to take on the Q&A part of our webinar today. I'm just having a look at all the questions that are coming in and we'll be able to answer those for you. If you are in particular favour of having a question asked, please do vote it up with the thumbs up button and then I can see which ones are resonating with you all the most should we run out of time. Sorry to introduce myself, my name is Jane White, I'm the Executive Director of Ord. I think the session really nicely put the context piece in. We got the very practical narrative from Umesh about what it's actually like to run an estate and the challenges that involved. And then Sally very articulately put forward some of those context pieces about actually how the work that they're doing to try and achieve things. And arguably on one of the most difficult types of estate, the large research estate as well. So Sally, that was very impressive. Okay, coming into the Q&A. Picking up, actually, there's some talk about EMR and HESA. I know from the latest return of EMR we had, so remembering that it's still mandatory as a return in Scotland and Wales, the voluntary return for England and Northern Ireland, we had 30 institutions make some kind of partial return, and in the majority, and I'm thinking probably about 95% of those cases, they were very small universities. And feedback was that the kind of the burden of filling in such a large data set was preventative to them. Ord are currently working with HESA and lots of other stakeholders to lean up that data set. And we've just had an iteration of a leaner data set agreed at the Ord conference that will then go back for consultation with you. So keep your eyes out for that. But looking at the most voted questions, do you, and this is open to anybody that can answer, I don't have the answer to this one. How do you declare PPA energy usage to HESA?
If I take that one, as far as I understand it at the moment, you can't, because it's effectively, unless it's owned by the particular individual institution, then it's effectively it will be coming through the grid. It's just you can just report it as renewable energy, but it doesn't fit anywhere in the EMR because they weren't really around that much before EMR.
Thanks, Steve. And picking up on the carbon reporting as well within HESA, I know the EAUC have done some work and they have submitted that to UK for consideration into collection on scopes 1, 2 and 3. And there's a consultation with BEIS, I believe, that's happening this October that's going to look into some kind of mandatory reporting by 2025. So progress there as well in terms of data collection for the sector, so we know where we are. Okay, question here for Sally. How is the shift in energy impacting on your electricity infrastructure and headroom on max capacity?
That's a very good question, but I'm not sure I'm that qualified to answer it in all honesty. I mean, at the moment, in terms of our infrastructure, our main focus is on, as I say, degasification. We are very conscious of the need as part of that to review capacity within the network to support a move towards electrification. And heating our estate, with electricity via than gas, but as yet we haven't done that piece of work. But we expect capacity, or lack of, I should say, to potentially be one of the key barriers we're going to encounter with our programme to degasify. So we are going to have to find an answer to that. But as I say, I'm not sure I can answer the question any more fully than that at this stage. I apologise.
No, not at all. Thank you, Sally. Umesh, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, and just to add a bit more context to that. So I think a lot of it depends on where your campuses are. So if you're in a sort of built-up area and there's a lot of development going on, there are going to be some considerable challenges. I know certainly at Montfort University, we're right next to a hospital site. They've recently just been awarded £750 million for a major reconfiguration plan, and they're going to require a lot more electricity use, as well as sort of trying to remove their gas usage, reliance on gas. We've got a football stadium very close by, and they've got some massive plans. And collectively, there's been some conversations that we're having about, is there enough electricity within this area, or do we need to sort of invest in millions of pounds? Western Power will provide that. I've given a sort of an eye-watering figure around £25–26 million for additional substations along our campus to meet that demand. That's just for the development. It doesn't take into account everything we've talked about today and the need to look at our car parking areas for additional electrical points, etc. So I think it's a massive problem for certainly built-up areas.
Thanks, Umesh. And we've got a question as well, based on electricity units. Usage, and Sally mentioned she was aiming to produce 90% of their electricity, and the question here is, how would this be managed to ensure its useful production at the right time?
Sorry, Jane, can you just repeat the question for me?
Of course. You mentioned that you were aiming to reduce 90% of your electricity usage, how will that be managed to ensure its production is available at the right time, so you've got what you need when you need it?
Is a question relating to what I said about the PPA? Yeah, just to clarify, where I said that our strategy is to secure future PPAs to make sure, or to increase the proportion of our supply through PPAs up to a maximum of 85%.
I believe so, Sally, yes.
Yeah, so if I'm not answering the question properly, forgive me, but just to reiterate what I was saying there, so we're aiming to reduce our electricity use. Obviously, you know, that's reducing energy use is top of the mitigation hierarchy, if you like, when it comes to carbon and energy management. So we're aiming to do that through a number of programs and measures, as I've outlined. But meanwhile, increasing the proportion of our electricity that does come through renewable sources, either procured via PPAs or by generating those ourselves on site. Does that answer the question, Joan? I'm not sure.
I think so, Sally, yes. If it doesn't, I encourage the person who asked it to pop back into the chat.
Yeah, please do, yeah.
We've talked a fair bit about changing behaviours of those that use our estates and our universities, and one of those is, I suppose, our way of reducing energy uses is to drop set points indoors. And the most popular question in here is, you know, if we do that, if we drop it to somewhere to say 19 degrees, what are we expecting as a fallout for that? Has anybody tried it, and what's the expectation?
Okay, if I start off and others can maybe join in. So if I was looking at this pre-COVID, I would say it would have been quite challenging to do that, without a doubt, because, you know, it is an average. So, you know, you expect temperatures to be lower than 19 degrees, and staff and students within the universities would not probably have accepted that. They would have said it's too cold because of their hearts and minds in terms of the clothes that they're wearing. You know, they would expect it to be a comfortable environment. But I think what we've seen in the last 2 years, and the messages that I raised earlier about what we're saying to our staff and students: wear appropriate clothing, make sure you've got layers on, don't expect it to be comfortable temperature by the university by wearing thin tops, etc., itself, or shirts. I think there's a shift change in that. People are recognize that there's fresh air, windows are open all the time, and they expected temperatures to be lower, even in the winter months as well. In that case, I think moving forward, there's a bit more of a fighting chance, I think, to lower set points to 19. Certainly for some universities, we can get away with it if we carry on with this hearts and minds change in what people are expecting, and they recognize it's not going to be toasty in buildings anymore.
If I could just add to that as well, just to say that the University of Cambridge does have a policy on thermal comfort that it adopted a number of years ago, and the policy says that the university aims to maintain its internal temperatures within the range of 19 to 21. So it doesn't give a specific cutoff at 19, but it's saying that, you know, we're aiming to maintain internal temperatures within that range. I think where we most experience challenge, if you like, to this policy is not so much in terms of heating buildings, it's more to do with cooling buildings. We often find building users claiming that or complaining that their internal temperature is too high, you know, obviously during the summer months in particular. So we have been working with departments to monitor internal temperatures in certain cases to see whether those claims are actually valid or not. Sometimes they're not, sometimes it's a perception thing, and actually the temperatures aren't as high as users perceive them to be. Although in other cases, temperatures are too high. And then what we try and do is work with departments to negotiate, find a solution that doesn't necessarily mean just sticking in an air conditioning unit. You know, it could be putting in some blinds. It could even in some cases be blocking up some windows if they're not required, so that we can sort of passively reduce temperature use rather than needing to use ventilation, air conditioning.
Thank you both for that. I just want to bring Steve in as well, if I may. Steve, there's been a comment really in the Q&A about the PPA and how it's accounted for. Do you just want to pick up on that?
Well, that's actually quite good news. Well, it's very good news, actually. I wouldn't mind seeing the email just so we can utilise that. To the PPA and REGO, so two things. The REGO, when you just get a standard renewable tariff or REGO product from a supplier, it goes against their fuel mix disclosure. So it forms part of the grid carbon emissions. On our PPA, so the PPA that we've done and that Cambridge are a party to, the PPA, sorry, the REGO is bundled with that power and it is retired. It does not go against anyone's fuel mix disclosure and it belongs to Cambridge in this instance.
Great, thanks, Steve. So we are running really short of time, and the questions that we don't get to today, we will try and answer and follow up with those with you on those topics. The last question I wanted to pose is something that Sally mentioned about actually the impact of reducing the footprint of the estate, the size of the estate. And I wondered what our panel's thoughts are a little bit deeper on that, particularly coming out of COVID and the kind of more agile way that we're teaching and learning and working. But are we expecting that to return to more of a normality with time and with student demographics? We're expecting a surge of eligible 18-year-olds. How do we manage that and keep our campuses kind of future-proof as well?
Shall I start that? And then others can obviously too. I mean, I think really it's how institutions are going to go about that will very much depend, vary on a case-by-case basis, depending on what their estate looks like at the moment and how they're using it at the moment. As I say, for Cambridge, both a challenge but also an opportunity we have is that we use our estate very inefficiently at the moment. So arguably, you could say to some extent, it might be easier for us to reduce the size of our estate by encouraging more efficient use of the space we already have, and then perhaps disposing of or repurposing certain buildings that we don't need to use to support teaching and research. Of course, in practice, that's very difficult to achieve for political reasons, if you like. And as I said in my presentation briefly, it's not in itself an easy or cost-free thing to do. There is a cost involved of decanting space and moving people around. But I think for Cambridge, that's first and foremost the issue we're looking at. How can we make more of what we've got? But if you're a university that's already got quite an agile and efficient estate, smaller estate, then obviously you haven't necessarily got that sort of space to trim, if you like. So you would need to acquire, you would need to take a different approach, which, as you say, may include more staff working elsewhere or at home more often, or more remote teaching, etc. But yeah, I very much think it's something that each institution is going to need to develop a response to suit their own specific priorities and circumstances.
Thank you, Sally. Umesh, just very, very quickly, we are on time.
Okay, yep, thank you. And I think just supporting what Sally said, that each institution will need to look at this in their own sort of own place. I think what we have seen in the last 2 years is a major reduction in new capital build programs, and I think that's set to continue, particularly with the carbon agenda, to reuse buildings. But the question also is, if you repurpose, that's fine. If you need them for future growth, that's okay. But otherwise, is there a sort of a market out there for selling these buildings? Are you going to get that value that you put in there? Because who's going to buy these buildings that you've got? Unless you've got sort of other people willing to pay that kind of money, you're not going to sell them. So your first option is going to be possibly to mothball, to try and reduce those costs. And I think that's the big dilemma. There's so much office accommodation out there at the moment that people are not going to be, they're going to be picky as to where they want it. They'll have choice.
Great, thank you. Thank you all very much today. I've got kind of 3 one-liners that I've written down from each of you. Really from Sally, the idea that to be open and transparent with your journey and that others can learn from what you have achieved and the challenges that you have faced. And from Steve, to kind of think about moving away from gas, finding an alternative. And then the provocative line from Umesh, you may, or our universities may have to choose between financial sustainability and our net zero carbon journeys. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you for joining us as delegates. Thank you to Emma as host, and thank you to our panel today. I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you.